G'day guys, welcome to this episode of Aussie English, the number one podcast for anyone and everyone wanting to learn Australian English. Guys, today I have a great interview for you. So, alright, what's the story? How did I find Will? Will was a mate of mine when we were going through high school, and I haven't caught up with him since then, since the end of year 12. I haven't seen him, except for, on the social medias, right? So I've been following him more recently on Facebook and watching his adventures up in the north of Western Australia. So he's been up there in the Kimberley and he's been posting a lot of amazing videos, a lot of amazing stories. And I thought, you know what, man, I need to get him on the podcast to talk about what life's like in some of the most rural and remote parts of Australia, where many of us city slickers, many of us who grew up around the cities never actually end up treading foot. So without any further ado, guys, let's just get into the interview. I'll give you Will Maas. Will is a mate from high school. I haven't probably seen you in, it would be at least 14 years now, right?
Yeah. Did you go to the 10-year reunion? Or?
No, I was in I was up on the other side of Melbourne and missed it. So yeah, it's been donkey's years, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah, fair call.
But I've been following you online on Facebook and everything with the social media, and you kind of sort of popped up again on my radar. I don't know, it would have been a year or so ago, and you're on the complete opposite side of the country now, up in Western Australia. And I wanted to get you on, obviously, to tell a story about how the hell that happened and what life's like. Like, how did you go from being, in Geelong at Geelong College with me back in the day to now living in WA working full time there?
Yeah, it's a bit of a crazy story. I still sort of pinch myself how I ended up here, really. When was it? March, the start of last year. Well, it was actually a few months before that. I had a van that I kitted out with a false floor. Pull out kitchen, just turned it into a camper. Had a mate's wedding on a weekend, and then a few days later, I was like, just shoved a heap of stuff in my car, packed the roof racks, and then I was off. So,
how easy is that to do? Because I'm sure a lot of people listening will be like, oh man, that's my dream, to get a van and kit it out and then travel around Australia. Was that something that took ages to prepare and cost you a small fortune, or?
Yeah, it did. It sort of helped that I already had the van that I was using. Initially, I bought it as to work out of, because I was a plumber back then. So I was going to kit it out, so I could work out of that on the road. But then prior to March last year, I think it was about September of the year before, I was reading an article by a photographer who was traveling around Australia, working and just moving from place to place. I was just like, whoa, that's so amazing. So I, like I said, I think it was like September. From then on, I just gradually, researched different things on how to set it up and that sort of thing, put it in place.
So you did it all yourself as well, did you?
I had a lot of help. I had a lot of contacts, obviously, being in the trade industry. I had a mate who was a cabinet maker.
Oh, man, too easy then.
So they did really high-quality kitchens. So I was just like, mate, I'll pay you what you want. Just do that. And it came up a treat. It was, perfect. Just like I said, at the back had like 2 pull-out drawers. One was a pull-out sink with a bit of bench space. And then the other one was like, I had my fridge there, a 40-litre fridge. Yeah. And then that also acted as a pantry. Another mate of mine, his dad used to work for Telstra, so he had the knowledge to put the solar panel on the roof. So really self-sufficient in that way. So that obviously if I was camped up in a spot for a few days, I didn't have to worry about continually turning the car on and off to charge the batteries. Had the dual batteries set up. So it all sort of comes together, or I think the final touches were probably in February. So it didn't really...
February of last year?
Yep. And then didn't really give me much time to do any test runs or anything like that. So
what happened? You just left? You were just like, all right, I'm ready, bye.
Pretty much. Yeah. yeah, so jumped, like I said, I had the mate's wedding, and then a few days after that, hit the road, and then headed. My plan was, because I'd done already a lot of the East Coast in previous years with other mates, short trips, and I've got family up in Brisbane as well. So
that tends to be the case with Aussies on the East Coast too, right? They tend to go up and down a lot, but they rarely go to the west, right?
That's right. Yeah. Prior to that, the furthest west I'd been was Adelaide, which is only, as you know, it's only like an 8-hour drive. So that was the furthest I'd been. So I thought, why not see a bit more of the country? So headed just from then, because I obviously was living in Geelong. For those who are listening, it was obviously just near Melbourne there, on the coast. Just followed it along the coast, had friends in Adelaide, caught up with them.
And was there a plan at the time, or were you just sort of like, I'm just winging it?
Obviously, there was a few places that I wanted to see, just, obviously the main ones that pop up. But then at the same time, I was pretty open about it all. I didn't really want to have a routine, so to speak. So I just almost left it to fate, like just see what. I just have the app, which is called Wiki Camps.
And that tells you where you can go and stay everywhere.
That's all pretty much run by other campers. They put in little spots that you can go, places of interest and campgrounds, and if they're free or they're asking for a charge and that sort of thing. So that was really helpful. I think it costs like $10, but the amount of time and things that it saves you, it's just it's $10 in the scheme of things is pretty good money spent. So
did you find any good spots? Were there any good stories of things you came across whilst you were sort of traveling west?
Yeah, there's a few eerie moments where I think the first spot was probably I was on the Nullarbor. So coming across the Bight there, and there was this. I was actually at a bush camp just a few days before, and I stayed there a couple of times just to change it up, because I was continually on the coast. And one of these guys was saying, gave me these absolute rough as directions. He's like, once you get to the Nullarbor Roadhouse, you go, it's exactly 10 kilometres, and there'll be a dirt track on your left-hand side. Just follow that. There's no signages or anything. There's a fence line that you sort of follow. Follow that down south towards the coast, and then you'll eventually find this old telecommunications tower. And I was just like, oh, yeah, the way he explained it was just like, oh, yeah, that's pretty easy to find. And then found the road, and it was, like he said, it was pretty much 10K on the dot. Started flying this road for about, I think I got about half an hour, 45 minutes in. I'm like, where the hell am I going? Like, he's let me down the garden path here. Like, but eventually, true to his word, I got to this spot, and it was funny. There was actually another camper at this same spot.
It wasn't Ivan Milat, was it?
Yeah.
Well, what's his name? Mick from Wolf Creek.
Yeah. Oh, I had a lot of stories running in the back of my mind. Don't you worry. I was just like, oh man, do I stay here? It was a bit of an eerie feeling about it, but sort of got into this little it just opened up, and I was like overlooking the ocean. Got out of the car, stretched the legs, and then I got a bit closer to the cliff. I'm like, oh shit, that's pretty decent. And I got right to the edge and looked down. It would have been a 60-meter drop to the bottom of this cliff, and I was like, had the car about 10 meters away from the edge. And I was just
Safety first.
That was my first real experience of just like, bush bashing it out of in the middle of nowhere. But at the same time, it was one of the most, probably the top 5 camp spots that I went to.
Were you just there alone too?
Yeah. There was just that one other camper.
Yeah.
Which turned out, it was funny actually. They had actually camped 2 cars away from me at Streaky Bay, which is sort of on the back about 2-day drive or something like that.
So you'd already seen them or something?
Yeah, I just went over and started talking to them, because the old boy was playing guitar, and I just got sprinkled with chat. Where did you come from? It's Streaky Bay. 3 days ago.
Did that same guy tell you the directions he told me?
Yeah, he must have. And then I was just like, yeah, what are the chances? And but then there's other spots where you'd go into from there. It was only a day or two after that, I went into another thing that I found on Wikicamps, which was an old homestead. Same thing, you drive off the highway about half an hour or something.
Yep.
And this old homestead, which back in the day was like a pretty pivotal spot where travellers stopped for like picking up supplies and whatnot. But nowadays it's just abandoned. There would have been about 50 old vintage cars that are just rusting away.
Really? You think people had just left them there, or they would have been owned by them originally?
Yeah, I think, I'm not too sure if it was just, it was pretty weird. It just sort of turned into like a car graveyard, but all these, once beautiful looking vintage cars, they're just scattered around this property. And then same thing, I was there by myself, decided to walk into this old homestead, like beautiful old homestead. It was actually built out of old railway sleepers.
Oh, really?
Yeah, yep. And it was in still pretty good nick for the age. And, I sort of started walking through the house, and it just had this feeling of like someone's got to jump out. There's creaks.
What am I doing?
Yeah. So that was another moment. I'm thinking, what if my especially my mum was watching me do this, she would not be happy with me. So
that'd sound like something out of Blair Witch or something, right? Where you need to be taking a selfie camera, and then you see someone's reflection behind you, and you're just like,
yeah. Which, because a lot of my trip, I was filming it on Instagram.
I remember.
And a lot of people were just like commenting, like, "What the hell are you doing there by yourself?" And they couldn't believe it, but. When you're looking back at that sort of thing, it just makes the journey, it just makes for a better story, really, I guess.
Definitely. Did you have to worry much about things in terms of safety whilst you were out there too? Were there sort of do's and don'ts for the average person?
Yeah, so probably once I passed Adelaide and I was, really by myself, it sort of sunk in. I actually got a little bit homesick because there was a few days there where you're walking around small towns and you might not say a word to anyone for the whole day.
Yeah.
And then you sort of get to a few different spots and you're by yourself, and then you hear cars coming in late at night, which it turned out to be like local fishermen or something just preparing their boats and that sort of thing.
It must be a totally different experience too, because I know, especially I noticed, have you heard of Lord Howe Island?
Yeah, yep.
We went there, and when we got to the island, because there's only like 300 people who live there permanently, everyone waves to you, and they're always coming up to you and wanting to talk to you and like, how's it going, blah, blah, blah. And you're just like, what the fuck's wrong with you, man? Like, this is so weird, because you're so used to being in a big city like Melbourne where you're around thousands, if not millions of people who just ignore each other.
Exactly, yeah.
Was it a weird thing to then go out into somewhere like the bush where now anytime you come across someone, it's almost rude to not talk to them, right? It's like you guys have to have a conversation because you could rely on each other if something goes wrong or...
Absolutely, yeah. It's especially once I started going off. So I think I can't remember what the peninsula's called, near Port Lincoln in South Australia. Once you sort of get into those areas, that community feel really does shine through really strongly.
Yeah.
You can go anywhere and just ask for help, and people are so willing. If they can't help you, they'll give you a phone number or point you in a direction that's, of someone who can. And that really came through. I was pretty surprised, that some of these spots are just in some of the most barren parts of Australia, yet the people there are just so helpful, which, like you said, it doesn't really, when you're in those metropolitan areas, that's something that a lot of people will forget.
It's almost like there's so many people around, you expect someone else is going to pick up the baton, right? Oh, the guy's on the ground having a heart attack. It's all good. There'll be someone here who can help, So, and then no one actually helps, right? So,
yeah, well, that's exactly right. Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? Even the whole way around, I then got adjusted to, like, when I got to Perth, it's not, compared to Melbourne, it's not as big, but it's a major city.
Still, what is it, about 1.5 million people or so? 2 million people?
I'm not exactly sure, but even just going to a place like that, I was like, I was there for a few days catching up with people, and I was like, I don't want to be here. I want to go back into the smaller communities. you have so much more fun. You can walk into a pub or whatever, be at a campsite, and people
And
walk
this
past
tends
and
to be that kind of split, right, between country people, the country folk, and the city slickers, right, where we kind of don't tend to understand each other very well unless there's, you know, that go-between by people. But quite often, at least I'd feel like a fish out of water if I went into the sticks, at least to begin with, I think, and vice versa.
Yeah.
You forget how much they shit themselves when they have to come to the city, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
But was
And
that for you, when you went out there, though, into those communities, did you get kind of like, you know, you embraced it, and then whenever you came back, you were like, oh man, this is not my world anymore. Like, I don't want this. This is horrible.
It is funny. Yeah. So yeah, continued on my trip, obviously made it up the West Coast. And before I left, I had this thing in the back of my mind that Broome was going to be a spot, whether it be I just make it to Broome, then I'd come home, or just make it to a 3-month mark. For some reason, that was just going to be a place that I'd end up.
Yeah.
And eventually I actually got this job, so I did 4 months with a company in Broome, working all around the Kimberley. Started that in late June of last year.
How did you score that?
It was on Gumtree, actually. I was
no kidding.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, so I just put out because I was just looking for casual work just to change.
Oh, so you put the ad out? It wasn't them who put the ad out. You were like, "Hi, I'm here. These are my skills. Give me work."
Yeah. I because I was just wanting to change it up. You know, the money side of things wasn't. I was sort of could have gone another 2-3 months. I would have been comfortable, but it was just mainly just to meet new people and whatnot. Yeah. I was actually traveling with 3 other people at that time, so you know, just to change things up a little bit. Got this job and realised how good it was, so that's why I stuck around for I think like 4 months or something. But it was funny. So we do our rosters 3 weeks on and 1 week off.
And what are you doing?
So we do all the essential services for Aboriginal communities around the Kimberley, supplying, you know, power, water, all that sort of thing, maintain all their power stations, water compounds. At the moment, I'm more of a maintenance in a front-end loader, so we do all fire breaks, tidy up their tips, their roads, and all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So I'm travelling around a fair bit. But yeah, just
does that have you going around like hundreds of kilometres, not just a small area, but you're like, the Kimberley is where I work?
So we're based in Broome, but our run, we travel as far as Kununurra, which was on pretty much about 40k short of the Northern Territory border.
I interviewed a chick from Kununurra yesterday about riding bulls.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, that's such a small world. Anyway, sorry. Keep going.
So that's like a 10.5-hour drive in a car, but for us being in a truck, we have to break it up into 2 days.
Yeah.
But so just going back to the earlier point, in July last year, I had to fly back home, and even being away, it was only 4 months or something. Flew into Melbourne, and I was just like, this is just too full on. I've got to get out of here. Like, was
it just sensory overload, right? Because there's so much noise.
Because I'd actually come from a community called Columbaroo, which is, I think it's one of the most northern communities in Western Australia. So it's, right up the top, a bit closer to the NT border. I actually got a small charter plane back to Broome for our break, and then from there, I had to fly Darwin, Sydney, then to Melbourne.
Holy moly.
But coming from, that was a hectic trek. But coming from there, a small community, and then flying into Melbourne, it was about 12 hours later. It was just like, I'm not used to this on it. Yeah, you just get used to that small community feel, and just not, and particularly our work, you might not see another car when you're driving for an hour or two. So
it is weird that you kind of get used to that, right? Like I had a kind of similar thing happen to us to a much smaller degree when we moved to Canberra, and you just realize how much smaller the place is, like, and it's almost like you see the same people all over the place, and you can just go for a walk and all of a sudden you're in a reserve where there's 100 kangaroos in front of you, and you're kind of like, man, when we moved back from Canberra to Geelong, I was just like, my God, I miss being able to just walk from the house and get to the bush, and just be like, I'm alone. There's people everywhere, but you don't know them. We moved into a house. I don't know my neighbors. I don't talk to them. They wave to you sometimes, but that's about it.
That's as far as your relationship usually goes, isn't it? And then,
so do you think you'll ever get back used to, city life, or is it the kind of thing now that you've had a taste of what it's like to get into the country and you're kind of like, I need to make sure that I maintain this kind of lifestyle one way or another?
Absolutely. Yeah. You just get used to that. Especially like our work at the moment. We go into spots where people might not have been there. Like, we went into one community to tidy up, and people hadn't been there for some reasons or not for a year or something.
What? So, you mean like the outside world hadn't just come in and, had anything to do with them? They'd just been doing their own thing.
Yeah. So we just go in there. It's usually like a one family or, two families just living in the middle of, or really an hour or two from the closest other town. And you just get used to that. We roll out the swag sometimes instead of setting up a proper accommodation, and you just get used to that. Like I said, that isolation with no one around you. You haven't got phone reception. You might not have phone reception for 2 or 3 days. So you just completely switch off. I mean, you've got a satellite phone if anything's to go wrong or anything like that. But yeah, just getting used to that you're just switching off for 2 or 3 days. It's just, it's magic really. And then to fly, I flew back home. I drove back home November last year.
Which route did you take?
So I actually finished work in Kununurra, so I had my van there. And then I did a month going up to Darwin and down through the middle, then to Adelaide, and then on to Geelong from there. So that took about a month. And then I was back home for December till mid-February. And then, obviously this role came back up. So flew to Perth for about a few days, and then I was back up to Broome late February.
So you didn't drive this time. You were just like, man, staying home.
I'd done about 30,000 Ks. So I was like, I think driving can have a rest for a while. Flying was a little bit easier and quicker. So, but even being back home for that, 2-3 months, I was like itching at the bit just to get away again. Just to, even, as you know, Geelong isn't a massive town, but at the same time, there's always, a lot of people around, and it is even pretty busy for what it is.
Did you miss the stars? I mean, that might be a weird question, but like, I can imagine at night time, somewhere like Broome must be about as far away from any other big city in Australia as you can get, except for maybe the Pilbara, or even, I guess, Ullarue's still near Alice Springs. But did you miss the sort of night sky out there compared to, trying to see it in Melbourne?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, even just flying into Melbourne at night time, and you just see the amount of lights, and you're trying to look up, and all you can see is, obviously that light pollution. And you're just like, oh, nah, this isn't good. So I actually got lucky when I was home. I just went solo camping over New Year's up to the snowfields near Mount Buller.
Yep.
And even up there, I was just constantly looking up. I mean, it's nothing compared to what we get to out in the Kimberley, where you've got hundreds of thousands, if not millions of stars that you're looking up at every night. Because you do get clear nights every day. Because obviously in the dry season you probably get a few cloudy days here and there, but for a good 6 to 8 months you've got clear blue skies and then clear nights. So the amount of stars are just I've just actually bought a new camera about a month ago, so going to try and get into that sort of that night photography, just to
definitely
try and you try and do it on an iPhone, but that
it doesn't do it justice.
No. So I've got the tripod and the new camera set up, so hopefully I can get into that. I've just got to figure out how to actually use the bloody thing. So
are you going to do wildlife photography as well? Because the wildlife off there must just be off the charts.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. You think there would be a lot of animal wildlife, that wildlife around. It goes through stages though. You might go through parts of the Kimberley where it's abundant with a lot of animals and whatnot, ranging from, your kangaroos, emus, but then you also get, a lot of people forget that there's actually camels that roam around
I
here
was
as
wanting
well.
to get onto that and ask you what it's like with all the camels there, because I watched I think it was called The Track or something. I forgot what it was, but the woman who walked through the Simpson Desert in the 70s, and she walked all the way to Shark Bay, and she had to fend.
Yeah,
It's a good
amazing
movie.
story.
She had to fend off a whole bunch of camels that came at her because she had a group of camels that she was taking with her, and the males were in rut or whatever and were really dangerous.
Yeah.
What's it like there with all the camels that are running around wild? Do you have to be careful?
I guess if it's mainly only when you're in a car, especially with cattle. It's like on dusk or dawn, because they do hang pretty close to the roads. They can just be driving along, a lot of dirt roads. You mainly sit on between 60 and 80 k's, and then obviously you'll be driving along, might be a little bit fatigued, and then this cow or camel will just jump out of the bushes, and you're like, oh shit, So, and obviously you're just not expecting. Obviously, we're trying to get used to camels being in Australia. A lot of people don't associate them being here, but they're actually a bit of a pest.
And we've got the biggest population, right? They came over from Afghanistan in the 1800s, and we've got the biggest population in the world now.
It's crazy, isn't it? Which, when I first saw the signs when I got across to Western Australia, you see, emu, kangaroo, wombat. Then you see a camel, you're like, what? What's going on here? But
do you ever see them on the side of the road dead, where they've actually been hit by a truck, or it tends to be the camel doesn't die, it kills the car, and then the camel walks off? Yeah,
they are very solid animals. And I've seen a few up close by, and you're sort of walking near them, and you're just like, well, that would do a lot of damage to a car if it was to hit it. So, I think the car would come off second best if that was to hit it. So, the road trains would probably be all right, but they're an incredible animal just to see up close how big they are. I guess coming from where they have, as you said, from Afghanistan and that sort of region, they are pretty used to these sort of conditions anyway, so that's why they probably thrive so much.
Yeah.
In and about.
They make weird sounds, right? Don't they make some kind of when they're...
Yeah, you nailed it. That's it.
I remember I was watching that movie and I was like, I didn't realize these guys sound like that animal out of Star Wars or something. You're just like, wow, that would freak me out if I was camping on the side of the road and just suddenly heard that murmuring of a camel somewhere. You'd be like, what is this?
Yeah, especially because they do hang around in groups as well, so you get them all roaring. It is a bit intimidating. Lucky we're sort of tucked away. A lot of our camps are we deck out shipping containers as our camping.
Oh, brilliant.
So obviously if they wanted to come in for a feed, they're not going to really penetrate into the shipping container. So
they'd have to duck, I think, right? Probably crawl in.
Yeah,
so
they might be able to. Yeah. So
what's life? Can I ask too? What's life like up there with the Indigenous people? Because obviously, and I recently read a book called Aboriginal Australians, and it was one of these situations where I did a complete 180 on my sort of views of Indigenous, the plight of the Indigenous, I guess, in Australia. Because you think, I guess, growing up where we grew up, you don't really meet any Indigenous Australians. They're hard to find, and so you're in a constant sort of I guess thought pattern of, if they just worked harder, they'd be fine, or if they just pull their shit together, they'll be fine. What's life like when you actually end up somewhere like Broome, where you're probably a minority now? How would you describe it to someone like me or who's foreign, who's just arrived in Australia, about what life's actually like in communities where there are lots of Indigenous people?
Yeah, so like I was saying, because all our work is primarily all based around supplying services for these communities around the Kimberley. So whether that be up at Columbaroo, which is right on the coast up north, or a town like Balgo, which is right down south in the desert. You go into a lot of places and you actually can't believe how they've survived for so long in these conditions, especially down south. where the landscape is so barren.
Yeah.
And it is a desert. So I went so I went from Columbaroo in my first month and a bit, my first stint last year. From there, I had to go to another job in Balgo. So I've gone from being on a river, lush greenery all around, and then from there I've gone down south into the desert where there's no water, no flowing rivers. It was funny. We were actually extending the sewer system to go to a new swimming pool that was being built there, and that would only be their only source of being able to go for a swim, because the dry season that they've just had has been one of the driest in a lot of years. A lot of the elderly people are saying that this is one of the driest they've ever seen. So yeah, to put it into context, like the main highway that goes from Broome to get to the Northern Territory, if you go about halfway, head south maybe an hour or two, you realise if you look at that up on a map, even like on Google Earth or something, you'll just see, brown. There won't be any greenery and anything like that. So for them to survive as long as they did, it's a testament to them, because they know the land so well, where a lot of in those dry seasons they would go to certain spots and there'd be these little springs that they could find. I've heard stories of decades ago where they would actually, if they were out hunting, they would have their water source at 1 in the morning, and then their next water source would be pretty much exactly a day's walk. So they relied on them. By the end of that day, they'd be, obviously really dehydrated and have to rely on that source to stay alive. And so that to happen for generations upon generations, just amazing that they could do it. But
and that must have just been obviously, subgroups of Indigenous people too, because people forget that there are so many different, effectively nations, right, of Indigenous people, languages. It's like Europe. It's not just there's one country that speaks one language and they're Aboriginals, right? So you would have these people in the desert who are the desert people, and then you'd have people in rainforests and people in places like temperate Victoria, and so they would have completely different skills and understanding of where to go and what to do on the land and what food to eat and everything like that, right, too. So you can't just take them from one place to another.
No, and a lot. I'm lucky enough to have, because I work in a crew of 3, and one of the guys, he grew up in Fitzroy Crossing, which from Broome is about 400 k's or 4-hour drive east along the highway. He grew up around that region, so he's got a lot of knowledge around the country and all that sort of thing. And he was telling me that there could be a tribe based in one certain spot, and then only 10, 20 k's down the road there'll be a neighbouring tribe, and they could speak a completely different language that they may have a couple of words here and there that they have similar, but then that happens all around Australia. Like,
yeah,
close, but like you said, the languages are all completely different, and there's probably there's hundreds of nations of tribes around.
There were 250 or so, and then I think they had like 600 dialects. So there was, when I was reading one of these books recently about the Indigenous culture after the Europeans arrived, it seemed crazy because it was weird too. The Indigenous tribes seemed to have this rule of, if you can communicate with the tribe, neighboring tribes, they're good. If you can't communicate with them, they're bad, kill them. Because, obviously it makes sense. If you can't get across a message or, in any way, shape or form, then it's better to see them as a threat. But I think they showed that was part of the problem when the Europeans arrived on the eastern coast. They kept pushing all these tribes off their own land and into other tribes. And so you had a lot more conflict happening amongst those tribes. But what's it like out there with the Indigenous people and, Western society kind of encroaching on probably the last remnants of where they can actually live? Is there a lot of conflict or tension, or?
I think there's a lot more tension between the elders and the younger generation of each community.
They're turning away from it a bit.
Yeah, like I was actually lucky enough to go on a tour just of a cave recently. which one of the elders took as in a group, and he would be in his 50s or so. He's in a small community, and he's running these tours. And I was asking him, are there younger people who want to do this sort of work or whatnot? He's like, oh no, they're not interested. They'd rather be in town, and
they want an iPhone. Damn it, give me an iPhone.
Exactly. Which it's funny how generations. That's only one generation. That's the gap, but how much of a different way of living that has changed. They're all about their tech, like you said, their iPhones and all that sort of thing, and they don't want to be out in the communities where all these elders are trying to pass on this knowledge of land and bush tucker and all that sort of thing, and Dreamtime stories and stuff like that. So
that's the hardest thing. When I finished this book, I was just like, what the hell do you do here? Because it's the more you quote unquote help, the more you kind of passively erode their own culture, right? Whether you actively mean to do it or it just happens because you encourage the younger generation to get educated, move to cities, become a lawyer or something. And it's like, well, they're not going to live in a community in the middle of nowhere and try and work as a full-time employee in the middle of the city at the same time, right? So it's like, how do you balance those two things of we want to encourage your culture to keep flourishing as best we can, but at the same time, we want to give you the opportunity to get educated, quote unquote, educated in the Western, way of doing things. But then it's kind of like you can't have both at the same time. So that's
right?
And it's funny because I guess that sort of happens with farmers in rural areas too, right? Where their kids quite often go to the city and then they're like, we're not coming back to the farms, screw that. We're staying here.
They see how easy it is in the cities, and then they're like, well, why would I go back to my small town in the middle of nowhere when I can just have everything I want in the cities?
But is there a sign? Because obviously seeing people like you who are going back into these kinds of areas and seeing how, the pros of it and the cons of living in cities, do you think there'll be a movement soon enough in the younger generation, where they get to a certain age and they're like, actually, I want to get back in touch with my roots and come back to the communities? Or do you think that maybe this could be the final nail in the coffin and there might be a lot of culture lost?
It's definitely going pretty strongly that a lot of the younger, probably the generation around our age, maybe they're in their 20s to the 30s, have been brought up with a lot more technology around them, so that's why they're being influenced to go to the cities a lot more. But I think their kids are starting to realise they want to keep that culture. Like, I can't remember where it was. There was a community where these kids are going to school. I think it's like a Catholic. They have a lot of Catholic and Christian schools around, and they actually said to the teacher, why are we being forced to learn in English when all I speak is our native tongue?
Yep.
So they're questioning that. They don't want to lose that, that cultural background.
Well, that's a great sign then, right? If they're saying, all right, we're going to speak our native tongue, but if we have to do English, we'll do it, but it's not going to be, we'll trade our native tongue for English. That's
right. Yeah. So like I said, that's promising signs that they still want to keep in touch with that, because I saw something the other day, the rate of these native dialects that are dying out. A lot of them would be, I think it was like by 2050, about half of them, and there's obviously, and this is worldwide, thousands of them are going to be lost.
It's ridiculous, right? Even in Australia, I think the majority of Aboriginal languages have less than 100 speakers. It's like there's only like 15 languages that have more than 1,000, and that's, they're slowly getting sort of shaved away.
Yeah, exactly. And especially a lot of communities that we're going into, where as soon as the elders of the community pass away, then the ones who are left, they leave the community and they'll just move into town, and then that community, that those generations of culture are just completely wiped off the map.
It's tragic, right? Because it's probably for a lot of these, obviously it's 60,000 maybe plus years that's been a continuous chain of passing on knowledge, and then it gets eroded away in a single generation. It's like
yeah. And then, obviously the stories, like a part of that tour group, we got in that cave, there was old cave. Well, it wasn't painting. It was actually they used rocks to scrape into the rock.
Oh, really?
The story of like a Rain Man and all that sort of thing. So you think you turn that community into a national park or something, a lot of the people who are running these national parks wouldn't have a clue that these paintings and stuff are there and the stories behind them and all that sort of thing. So
some of it's insane, right? There was a TED talk I watched the other day with an Indigenous woman from, I think, around Uluru, from that area in Alice Springs, and she said there was a story that had been passed down so long that it was a story where I think at night the older ladies would tell the daughters, if you go out into the darkness, watch out for the big beast that'll come and try and take you. But if you need safety, climb up the tree because he can't look up. He can only look from side to side. Mm. And through the story's details, they reckon that it comes from what's that? There was a megafauna animal from 40,000 years ago called Diprotodon or something that was like a huge wombat. And they think that story could have been effectively passed down for that long, for that many thousands of years.
It's amazing, isn't it? Yeah. Which I don't know if you've heard of the book called Sapiens.
Yeah, it's a good one, right?
Which they mentioned that megafauna in Australia. And then you try and you're hearing these stories, as you said, that you sort of get, okay, so that's where they're sort of coming from, and then you can see in some of their patterns where their paintings or whatnot, you're starting to make out, okay, so this is how this has come about. So
I think the paintings that blow my mind the most are the ones of the First Fleet or of James Cook's ships on the wall, because you just imagine that moment in history where these two cultures that have been separated for that long suddenly came into contact, and these people may have not even had direct contact but saw this stuff on the horizon and were just like, what is this shit? And then drew it on a wall. Like, what the
Yeah, like these evil spirits or ghosts or whatever coming back to life. It would have. Imagine seeing that, like, and even just like simple things like early explorers in Australia. Even just going back, there's a book called Nomads, which is about this couple in Western Australia, which I think they're known to be the last traditional.
This guy was the guy who went in to get them with Mahjong or whatever, the friends of the couple, right? He was in a book I read recently, The Explorers, about the explorers in Australia, and that was the last story, was them going in to get this couple of Indigenous people, right, in WA.
Yeah, and they but imagine, because there was a lot of exploring with cars and stuff going around. This is only going back, that was 60 years?
That was 77. Like that? So that was in 77. Yeah.
And imagine them seeing like tire marks or that sort of thing, and you'd just be like, they'd be like, well, that's not a kangaroo, or that's not a wombat trail or whatever. So
it would have been insane for those last few groups that had never come in contact with, it would be amazing to sit them down at that first contact and be like, what's your view of an iPhone? If you like, here's this thing that we can order food on, we can call our friends and talk to them on the other side of the world. Like, what is your opinion of this thing? Like, does this seem like magic?
Yeah, exactly. Which there's a good documentary called Footprints in the Sand, which is based on them, and it shows them being brought into the town. This couple, I can't remember if they get dressed in like Western clothing and whatnot, and you can just see how unhappy they are to be away from their country. Yeah, they just want to be back out there. As harsh as it was, a lot of the water was drying up, all their wells.
That was the tragic thing, right? They had to they didn't take them out, but the Mahjong and the other guy went to find them because there'd been the worst drought ever recorded in that area, and they were like, how can these people survive off the land, so we need to save them. The thing that blew my mind about that story was Mahjong lighting a fire. Like, he just goes out there, they try and find where they are, and they're like, oh fuck, I've got no idea where my friends are, they should be around here within a few Ks. So he just sets fire to a bush of spinifex, waits 10 minutes, and then looks on the horizon and there's another fire coming up, and that's how they found each other. I'm like, that is, I would never have thought of that.
And he just lucky that he had that knowledge to do that. It's just like,
they would have been driving around until today, right?
Doing the old cooey or something like that. Like, but yeah, just to even see that documentary, and you can just see they're still in traditional dress, and even the way he was standing, which is what John, who I work with, he was saying how they stand with one foot sort of raised against their knee, so he's standing on one leg. He goes, that is the traditional way a real Aboriginal will stand. Just sort of seeing all that, he's got his spear and just seeing how they're still living. And that was, like you said, 40, 50 years ago, they're still living like that. It was just incredible to see. But now the sad thing is because our company's been doing this for over 15 years, so they're used to us coming in and working in their communities. You go in there and a lot of that is being lost, which is pretty sad in a way, because not all communities have their own stores, but a lot of them do have tiny stores that they can go to. So they've got everything there, just like cereal, and they're losing all that history of traditional cooking and all that sort of thing.
It must be so tricky when you get to that situation of, we'll give you stuff to help you get by, but then it undermines their own culture and their own, what they were already doing to get along. So you kind of like, you're helping, but you're not helping at the same time. And it must be such a difficult position to be in.
It is.
And I remember hearing a story about, I think, Indigenous people being given axes. Quite often they used to be given tomahawks as a way of payment, because it was I can imagine it was a bitch to make a stone axe back in the day. Yeah. The problem was, though, that all the elders were the ones who controlled the axes and had made them and, would lend them to other people, and it was their power. And so as soon as the Westerners came in, the Europeans just gave away tomahawks willy-nilly. You suddenly undermined the sort of hierarchy of the entire tribe.
Yeah. It's easy. I was lucky enough on that same tour. He had these traditional stones that they did make their axes out of, and they actually used something from a termite mound. It's like a sap or something that comes off this mound that they used to glue the stone to like a bit of wood. Yeah. And just seeing that, and I was just like, holy moly. And then how they would make like their even boomerangs and that sort of thing. The wood that they use is like a real hard wood. Even using a chainsaw to cut it, it stuffs the blade almost in one cut. Yeah. So you just think they're trying to use these rocks to cut all that, and then obviously shape it right down into a boomerang. It's incredible.
Well, the best thing. What about making didgeridoos, right? Because you think, how the hell were they boring a hole out of a tree? And then you realise they weren't. They just shoved the tree into a termite mound and let the termites do the work, and then came back in a few weeks and it was hollow.
That's right. Yeah. It's just incredible. No, but saying that, that's going back to that first stint up at Kalumaroo. I think it was only a few days in. We were doing a tank upgrade at the water compound, and we were staying at a house there, and it was just a short walk around the corner. And I was walking to the water compound, and then next minute I see this guy just walking down the street with this spear, and he was going off hunting. I was just like, what? What's going on here? But they are still using, like a few of them are still using that same technique to stalk animals and spear them. So that was still good to see that coming up. As much as Western influence is having on them, a lot of them are still trying to keep those traditional ways about them. So
do you feel envious to some degree that they have that kind of history too and that connection in Australia? Because when I was growing up, I was always like, I feel Australian. I consider myself Australian, but to be honest, when you stand next to an Indigenous person who can trace their roots back here to 60,000 years, it's kind of like, what am I? I wish I had that connection. Like this land, I have had ancestors on this for that long. Like it must be mind-blowing, right?
Which is one of the things that tour guide said to us. He said, because he was from near the region, he was saying, I know my connection to this land, where my family is from. How many of you can tell me where your ancestors were from? And I was thinking, well, I know grandparents, and their
Geelong, mate. Geelong.
Just down the road, mate. But I was just like, I know maybe a few generations and a rough idea. They came from England, and then that's about it. It gets a bit, vague after that, but they can go back, hundreds of years, generations upon generations, and they know that this land that they're standing on, their great 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 grandfather was standing there, years prior. So
Yeah.
it is having that connection to the land like you said, it is. You do get a bit jealous about it because it is a pretty special thing to be able to have. And they are very family orientated. They tend to have their children when they are younger, so they can grow up with their child. Then once they get to, that when they're about 40 years old or something, that's when their child will start having children of their own, where I think Western culture is a little bit different.
You don't start until you're 40, mate.
That's right, exactly, eh? And I was saying, we sort of we're almost a little bit selfish in a way, where we do all our own thing first for, till we're 30, 40s these days, and then we start thinking about children, or at least that's what I've sort of heard. Don't have any children of my own, but
not yet.
all that I know of. So, but just hearing that sort of things, they are, and then they will look after their their parents and grandparents when they're all elderly. So that's one thing. When I did go back home, which I was trying to say was their house, their family, roots are so strong, and their values. It blows you away how much it means to them to have family around them. And then obviously things with the stolen generation and all that sort of thing. And for some people that worked out really well for them. That gave them opportunities which, looking back, they said it's the best thing that's ever happened to them. They said,
really?
The way that things were going, it was really tough for them. But once they actually got taken away, as harsh as it does sound, they say it's the best thing that has happened to them. And
the problem was, though, right, that it wasn't an option. It wasn't a free choice, kind of like, hey, do you want to send your kids with us? It was more like, your kids are coming with us.
yeah, which people hear, like I've heard that firsthand from many Aboriginal people.
No kidding.
That they are really happy that it actually happened to them, that they got taken to ministries and that sort of thing. Whereas,
but have they completely lost their culture as a result, or they've gone back since then and then, reconnected with...
No, they're still able, because a lot of the ministries were still pretty close to where they were brought up, so they were fortunate enough to still be in the area, so they still had that connection, and a lot of them did go back to their community when they were old enough to. They might be, when they're in their mid-teens or something, they were out working on stations or whatnot, so they were still able to, when they were on break, when they were working, they could go back to community, go hunting on their land and do what they used to do. But then a lot of the time you only hear the stories where stolen generation, they had everything taken away from them, which to a lot of people that is true. They did get, their lives changed for the worse.
Well, there was you can't use your native language, you can't ever go home, you can't intermingle with other people who effectively, like it was all, and we're never going to tell you where you came from. So even if you wanted to go home,
change your name and all that, so the way they dress and everything like that as well, even things they eat, and even just living in a house, I suppose, compared to just living out in the bush, just simple things like that. But it was just funny hearing it firsthand, just that they were pretty grateful that they were actually taken away as young as 5 or 6, put into these ministries, and just hearing that they loved it was a blessing in a way.
Yeah, it's so interesting that there's two sides to every story, I guess, right? And it doesn't play out the same way everywhere.
That's right, yeah. So a lot of these times, especially coming from the East Coast, all you really hear in the media, and that is the negatives, stolen generation, you've got to say sorry and all that sort of thing. But rarely do we hear these stories where it's actually been a really good benefit for a lot of people, particularly in communities where going through drought or something like that, they probably wouldn't have survived. So that's been the big eye opener for me, which is why I love doing this job, you keep hearing these new stories and that sort of thing. And yeah, it just blows my mind when you're hearing stuff like that they can be grateful for being taken away from their family.
Yeah.
I mean,
that's not what I was expecting to hear.
Yeah, which when I hear it, I sort of question. I'm like, really? And then, yeah. And then they explain what's going on, and you're like, oh, well, that does make sense.
So what advice would you have for people listening, whether they're Australian or not, in terms of going to WA? Would you recommend it? And what advice would you have if they end up going somewhere like the Kimberley, right?
Yeah, especially with overseas people, doing their farm work and that sort of thing. If you are fortunate enough to be able to go out or even just volunteer, it doesn't have to be for your farm work. The people who I was travelling with actually did, I think it was like a week or two that they went out from Broome. They travelled out into the bush and they did some volunteering, like painting and community cleanups and that sort of thing. And they were so grateful to be able to have that experience, learn about culture, traditional cooking, their ways of life, and all that sort of thing. So if they do get the opportunity, I'd 100% recommend it, because you'll learn and see things which you can look up on YouTube or read in a book, but actually seeing it firsthand and hearing their stories, it'll stay with you forever. I know doing this, I won't ever forget it, because
for sure,
it is so powerful, some of the stuff that they do tell you and show you. And if you do, you might even get lucky enough that you can go into some of their sacred sites, or see some of their private paintings and that sort of thing. So just seeing that sort of stuff, it is a really special thing to do. So if anyone does come over and has that opportunity, don't think twice about it, because it truly is a remarkable experience to be able to do and see. So
far out. Well, Will, thanks so much for coming on the podcast, man. How can people find out more about you and obviously follow you on the social medias?
Yeah, I do get pretty busy on Instagram. So it's, I'm just wondering _Wilbur. And yeah, like I said, I upload a lot of trying to keep myself entertained, because a lot of the time you go insane if you're not not doing.
We had a video. Didn't you have a video recently having to mow an airstrip, right? And I was like, with a whippersnipper, I was like, what the fuck, dude? Like, you can imagine how long did that take?
That took a while. Around every cone on this, I think it was about 1.5 kilometres, and it was pushing about 40 degrees as well. So that was really hot. Which nearly every day when you wake up, you don't have to look at the weather forecast. It's 30, 35 every day, clear blue skies. So, what was I going to say? But yeah, so on Instagram, I usually just upload, and I'm trying to put up pictures of where we are and the landscape that we're traveling around, because I just get blown away everywhere we go. We're in a different spot nearly every day. So just some of the sights you see, especially the big boab trees of a night time, it's
far out.
Incredible. It's incredible. So, so jump on, wandering _Wilbur. And apart from that, that's about it.
You're going to have to start vlogging, man. You're going to have to start a YouTube channel so that all these guys can check it out and get a taste of Western Australia from you.
A lot of people have said that. I said, it must be, maybe that could be a new career change or something.
Man, get on it. Anyway, thanks so much again, Will. I really appreciate it.
No worries, mate. Pleasure to see you again.
All right, guys, thanks so much for joining me today. I hope you got a lot out of this interview. Will, thank you so much for coming on again, man. It was an absolute pleasure, and I'm sure we're going to have to get you on again in the future to talk about more of these stories from way up north and way out west. Anyway, guys, that's probably about all there is to it today, so I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you had a good one, and I'll see you soon. Peace.